Dollar General is replacing the grocery store in rural America, and seniors are paying the price. And I want to give you the number that proves it in the first 30 seconds, because this is not an opinion and it is not a feeling. The United States Department of Agriculture, working with economists from North Dakota State University and the University of Connecticut, studied what happens when a dollar store opens. They looked at 20 years of data from 2000 to 2019. When a new dollar store opened in a rural area, the likelihood that the independent grocery store closed was 5%. That's nearly 3 times the rate in urban areas. Sales at the rural grocery dropped 9.2%. Employment dropped 7.1%. And here is the part that should stop you cold. In urban areas, those effects faded after about 5 years. In rural areas, they did not fade. They continued. There are more than 35,000 dollar stores in this country now. Nearly 20,000 of them are Dollar General. That's more dollar stores than all the Walmarts, Targets, McDonald's, and Starbucks in America combined. And a typical dollar store carries no fresh produce at all. Let me explain what that actually cost you. Here is exactly what happens to a town when that store opens. Let me walk you through the sequence, because it plays out almost identically in every small town in America, and once you've seen it described, you'll recognize it immediately. A town has a grocery store, usually family-owned, usually there for decades, usually the same family for 2 or 3 generations. It's not fancy, but it has a produce section, a meat counter with somebody behind it, a dairy case, maybe a small pharmacy, or at least a shelf of the basics. Then a dollar store opens, usually right at the edge of town, on a piece of land that got rezoned commercial at a meeting that maybe 11 people attended, and nothing dramatic happens at first. People still go to the grocery for their real shopping, but they start picking up paper towels at the dollar store because it's on the way home. Then the cereal because it's cheaper. Then the canned goods. Now here's the arithmetic that kills the grocery store, and I don't think most shoppers have any idea about it. A grocery store runs on razor-thin margins. 1 to 3% net profit is the industry norm, and the store loses money or barely breaks even on the things you think of as groceries. The produce, which spoils. The meat, which requires refrigeration and a skilled butcher and has to be marked down when it approaches its date. The dairy, which has a short shelf life. Where does the store actually make money? On the shelf-stable center aisle items. Paper products. Cereal, canned goods, cleaning supplies, snacks, which is precisely, exactly what the dollar store sells. So the dollar store isn't taking a slice of the groceries business evenly. It is taking the profitable slice and leaving the unprofitable slice behind. The grocery store now has all the cost of the produce section and the meat counter and much less of the revenue that used to subsidize them. The ILSR has documented reports of sales drops of roughly 30% at small-town grocery stores after a Dollar General opens. 30% in a business running on 1 to 3% margins. There is no version of that arithmetic that works, so the grocery cuts hours. Then it cuts the butcher. Then the produce section shrinks to a sad rack of onions and potatoes because they can't turn the inventory fast enough to keep it fresh. Which makes people shop there even less, because who wants wilted lettuce? And then it closes. I want to give you the scale of how often this has happened, because the individual story sounds like bad luck, and the aggregate tells you it's a pattern. Kansas State's Rural Grocery Initiative found that 1 in 5 rural grocery stores in this country closed between 2008 and 2018. 1 in 5 in a decade. And here's the number that tells you it's permanent. In half of the 105 Kansas communities that lost a grocer, no new store had opened by 2023. Half of them. Years later, still nothing. That's the finding that changed how I think about this. Because when a business closes in a normal market, something eventually replaces it. If there's demand and there's a building, somebody comes. That is not happening here. Once a rural town loses its grocery store, the store mostly does not come back. And the reason is that the economics that killed the first one are still sitting there waiting for the second one. Which means every one of these closures should be treated as permanent when it happens, not as a temporary gap. And it means the fight has to happen while the store is still open. Because afterward there is essentially nothing to fight for. And now the dollar store, which never carried fresh food, is the only place to buy food in that town. I want to be very clear that I'm not describing a scheme. Nobody at Dollar General sat down and plotted to close your grocery store. The company is doing what companies do, which is selling profitable items in places where people will buy them. But the effect is the same regardless of the intention. And the effect is that a town trades a store that sold food for a store that sells packaged goods, and everybody involved made a reasonable individual decision along the way. Kansas State University runs something called the Rural Grocery Initiative, And their program director, Riel Carver, put it about as well as it can be put. Rural grocery stores are facing a whole set of challenges that have been building for years. Aging infrastructure, population decline, old equipment, less ability to take advantage of newer programs. And then, as she said, when a dollar store comes in, those challenges come to a head. The dollar store can be the last straw facing a rural grocery. The last straw, not the only cause. The last one. The price on the shelf is low, and the price per ounce is frequently higher. Now here is the part that I most want you to understand, because this is where seniors specifically pay the price, and almost nobody has explained it plainly. Dollar stores are not necessarily cheaper. I know how that sounds. Everything is a low price. That's the whole proposition, and it's right there in the name. But here's what the Institute for Local Self-Reliance found, and I'm quoting the substance of their research directly. Packaged in single-serving quantities, dollar store food offerings have lower price points but are often more expensive per ounce. Read that twice because it's the whole trick, and it is completely legal, and it is done in plain sight. The sticker price is low because the package is small, not because the food is cheap. You pick up a bottle of dish soap for $1.25, and it feels like a bargain, and it is 8 ounces, when the supermarket version was 32 ounces for $4. So the supermarket was 12.5 cents an ounce, and the dollar store is about 15.5 cents an ounce. You paid 25% more, and you felt like you saved money. Now multiply that across an entire cart, across every week, across a year. And here is why this lands hardest on older people, and I want to name it directly rather than dance around it. First, a lot of us have trouble reading the small print. The unit price is in the corner of the shelf tag in tiny type, if it's there at all, and requirements vary by state. If you can't read it comfortably, you cannot comparison shop, and the entire defense against this pricing structure is unavailable to you. Second, people on fixed incomes shop by what they can afford today, not by what's cheapest per ounce. If you have $40 until the 3rd of the month, you buy what fits in $40. The 8-ounce bottle fits. The 32-ounce bottle doesn't. So the person with the least money is structurally forced into the worst deal, every single time. That's not a moral failing. That's what happens when you have a cash flow problem rather than a budgeting problem, and the two get confused constantly. Third, small packages mean more trips, and more trips means more driving, or more asking somebody for a ride, or more paying for a ride. Every one of those has a cost that never appears on any receipt. Now, I want to be fair, because the picture is not uniformly bad, and I don't want to mislead you. Some things at dollar stores genuinely are good deals. Greeting cards, basic cleaning supplies at certain sizes, some seasonal items, party goods. If you're buying a card for a grandchild, $1.25 beats $6 at the drugstore every time. And there are dollar store locations that carry larger national brand packages at competitive prices, particularly the larger format stores. So the honest advice is not to avoid the store. The honest advice is that you cannot assume, and the assumption is exactly what they're counting on. Which brings me to the single most useful habit I can give you, and it costs nothing. Read the unit price, not the price. That's the small number on the shelf tag, showing cost per ounce, or per pound, or per 100 count. It's the only figure that's actually comparable across package sizes, and it's the one number a manufacturer cannot manipulate by changing the container. If the type is too small, use the camera on your phone and zoom in. I do this constantly, and I've stopped being embarrassed about it. Take a picture of the tag and enlarge it. It takes 4 seconds. Do that for 2 weeks and it becomes automatic, and you will be genuinely shocked at how often the thing that looks cheaper isn't. Let me give you the categories where the per-ounce gap tends to be widest, because knowing where to look saves you the trouble of checking everything. Cleaning products and detergents are frequently the worst offenders, because a small bottle looks like a bargain, and the concentration is the same. Personal care items. Shampoo, lotion, toothpaste. Travel sizes at nearly full-size prices. Paper goods where roll counts and sheet counts and ply have all been quietly adjusted, and the packaging language is deliberately confusing. A mega roll and a double roll are marketing terms, not measurements. Spices and baking supplies, where the tiny container can be several times the per-ounce cost of a normal jar. And over-the-counter medications, which is the one I'd watch most carefully. A small bottle of pain reliever with 24 tablets versus a 100-count bottle at a pharmacy is frequently a very large per-tablet difference, and this is a category older adults buy constantly. Where dollar stores tend to be genuinely competitive is on greeting cards, gift wrap, seasonal decorations, basic kitchen items, storage containers, and certain snack items. So the rough rule I'd offer is this. If it's a consumable that you buy over and over, check the unit price, because that's where the gap compounds across a year. If it's a one-off purchase, the sticker price is probably fine, and you're not being harmed by not checking. That's not a boycott. That's just knowing which aisle to be careful in. A store with no produce is not a grocery store, whatever the map says. Let me talk about what these stores actually stock, because there's a real difference between a place that sells food and a place that sells groceries, and the distinction matters enormously for an older body. The ILSR's research states it plainly. A typical dollar store carries no fresh produce, only a limited selection of processed foods. The USDA study noted the same thing, describing the food options at these stores as often highly processed. Now, let me be fair and current, because this has been changing, and I want to give you the accurate picture. Dollar General has been adding produce to a growing number of locations, and they've made real announcements about reaching produce milestones. Their larger format stores carry considerably more than the standard ones. So the picture is not static, and it's genuinely better than it was 5 years ago in some places. But it's a minority of stores, and if you live in a small town, the odds that yours is one of the produce locations are not good. And the produce that does appear is typically a limited selection of the most durable items rather than anything resembling a produce section. So here's what a person is actually choosing from in a typical rural dollar store. Canned vegetables and canned fruit, usually packed in syrup or heavy salt. Boxed dinners, pasta and rice, cereal, crackers, chips, cookies, frozen pizza and frozen prepared meals. Soda, candy, shelf-stable milk, sometimes, bread, sometimes, eggs at some locations. Now, that will keep a person alive. Let me be clear about that. Nobody starves in a town with a Dollar General. But look at that list through the eyes of a 78-year-old with high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes, which describes an enormous number of the people watching this. Nearly everything on it is high in sodium, refined carbohydrates, or added sugar. Canned soup can carry an entire day's sodium in one can. Boxed dinners are salt and starch. The frozen meals are the same. And for somebody managing blood pressure or blood sugar or kidney function, that is not a minor inconvenience. That's the difference between a condition that stays controlled and one that doesn't. And the consequence of that shows up in a hospital 18 months later. There's a particular cruelty in this that I want to name. Older adults frequently need more protein, not less, to maintain muscle mass. And they need fiber, and they need potassium, which comes overwhelmingly from fruits and vegetables. A store built around shelf-stable processed food is close to the exact inverse of what an aging body requires. And the research community has been careful about this. A study noted that dollar stores replacing independent grocers could further reduce access to healthy food options in these communities, with potentially adverse implications for public health. That's academic language for something quite simple. When you take the produce out of a town, the people in that town get sicker, and it takes about a decade to show up in the numbers. And there's a newer finding worth adding, because it complicates the picture in a useful way. Research published in December of 2025 looked specifically at urban neighborhoods and found that dollar stores can reduce food access in areas that started with only one grocery store, and that the effect was most pronounced in areas with higher poverty, higher black populations, and limited vehicle access. The researchers noted the effect increases with each additional dollar store, which suggests it's a saturation problem rather than a single store problem. Interestingly, that same research found the effect was less pronounced in rural areas and in most urban areas overall. Now, why am I telling you a finding that partly cuts against my argument? Because I'd rather you have the accurate picture than a tidy one, and because it points to something important. The damage isn't uniform. A dollar store in a town with 3 grocery stores is just another store. A dollar store in a town with 1 grocery store is a threat to the only food access that town has. Which means the question worth asking about your own community is not whether dollar stores are good or bad in the abstract. It's this: how many places within reasonable distance of me currently sell fresh food? If the answer is 3 or 4, you have resilience and you can relax about it. If the answer is 1, that one store is critical infrastructure, and it should be treated that way by everybody in that town, including the people who run it and the people who shop there. Now, I want to give the other side, because there is one, and it's important. Research from the Center for Science and the Public Interest found that dollar stores are generally viewed by residents as providing access to food in food deserts. And in many places, that's genuinely true. A dollar store in a town with nothing is better than a town with nothing. The problem isn't that dollar stores exist. It's what happens when a dollar store arrives in a town that had a grocery store and then the grocery store is gone, and what's left is worse than what was there. You didn't just lose the food, you lost 4 other things at the same time. I want to talk about what else disappears when the town grocery closes, because people focus on the food and the food is only part of it. The first thing that goes is the pharmacy. In a lot of towns, many small town grocery stores had one, or were attached to one, or the same family ran both. And I've talked before about pharmacy deserts. Nearly 50 million Americans now live in an area where filling a prescription requires a meaningful drive. And the research is consistent that when the pharmacy gets further away, people take their medications less consistently, and inconsistent blood pressure medication produces strokes. So the store closing is a medication adherence problem, not just a shopping problem. The second thing is the meat counter and the deli, and that matters more than people realize for older shoppers. A butcher will cut you one chop, he'll grind a half pound. He'll tell you what's good this week and what to do with it. He'll sell you a portion that makes sense for a person who lives alone. The packaged meat at a dollar store where it exists comes in family-sized portions in sealed trays, which means a widow either buys more than she can use and throws half of it out, or she doesn't buy meat. That is a genuine nutritional consequence of a packaging decision, and nobody thinks of it that way. I heard from a woman once who said she'd more or less stopped eating meat after her husband died, and when I asked why, she said it was because everything came in packages for 4 and she couldn't stand throwing food away. She'd grown up in the Depression. Throwing out food was close to a moral failure for her, so she ate what came in single portions, which meant she ate a lot of canned soup and a lot of toast. She wasn't poor. She had the money. The store simply didn't sell food in the quantity a person living alone actually needs, and she solved it the way she'd solved everything, which was by going without and not mentioning it to anybody. I think about that constantly when people talk about food access, because she had access. There was a store, she had money, and she was still slowly not eating properly because of packaging. If that's you, 2 practical things. Buy the family package and freeze it in portions the day you get home, in freezer bags, labeled, "It takes 10 minutes once, and it solves the problem entirely." And if there's still a butcher counter anywhere within reach of you, use it, and tell them what you actually want. 1 chop, a half pound. They will do it. They will not think anything of it, and it is exactly what that counter exists for. The third thing is credit and flexibility. In a lot of small towns, the grocer knew everybody. He'd let somebody run a tab until the check came. He'd deliver to the housebound. He'd put something aside. He'd notice when somebody hadn't been in. A corporate store with a headquarters 4 states away does none of that. And it isn't because the clerk doesn't care. There's no mechanism. The fourth thing, and this is the one I think we underestimate most, is that the grocery store was a place where people saw each other. For a lot of older people living alone, the grocery store was one of maybe 3 places they went in a week where somebody said their name out loud. The cashier who knew them. Running into a neighbor by the eggs. A 5-minute conversation that was the only conversation that day. You do not get that at a store staffed by one overworked person running a register at the front of a building with 11 aisles. I don't want to be sentimental about this because sentiment doesn't fix anything. But I think it's a genuine loss and it belongs on the list because the research on social isolation in older adults is not soft. It's associated with real mortality risk, and the mechanism by which people become isolated is exactly this. The places you used to go, one at a time, stop existing. And there's a fifth thing, which is money. A locally owned grocery store spends its money locally. It banks locally. It hires locally at more than a skeleton level. It buys from some local suppliers. The owner's family lives there, sends kids to the school, sits on the fireboard. As one researcher quoted by the ILSR put it, profits from Dollar General are going back to their corporate office, not to the community. So a town doesn't just trade one store for another. It trades a business that recirculated money locally for one that extracts it. And it does that at exactly the moment when its tax base is already shrinking. SNAP dollars go further or shorter, depending entirely on where you spend them. I want to cover something that affects a great many older Americans directly, and that I have never once heard explained on television. If you receive SNAP benefits, and roughly 40 million Americans do, where you spend them changes how much food you actually get. Here's why. SNAP benefits are a fixed dollar amount each month. They don't adjust based on which store you shop at. So if your benefit is $200, you get $200 of purchasing power, and the question is how much food that $200 buys. At a store where the per ounce price is higher, it buys less food. Same benefit, less nutrition. And remember what the ILSR research found. Dollar store food is packaged in single-serving quantities with lower price points, but is often more expensive per ounce. So a household spending its entire SNAP benefit at a dollar store is, on many items, getting materially less food than the same household spending it at a full grocery store. That's a genuinely troubling situation because the households most likely to be shopping at a dollar store are exactly the households most likely to be on SNAP. Now, dollar stores do accept SNAP, and that's genuinely important. In a town with no grocery store, a SNAP-accepting dollar store is the difference between using your benefit and not using it. I'm not arguing they shouldn't accept it, but there are things worth knowing that can stretch that benefit considerably. First, SNAP can be used at farmers markets in most of the country now, and a great many markets participate in programs that match or double SNAP dollars spent on fresh fruits and vegetables. Programs like Double Up Food Bucks operate in a lot of states. That means your SNAP dollar can literally become $2 of produce. If you are on SNAP and you have a farmer's market within reach, that is the single highest value thing you can do with your benefit. And participation rates are low because almost nobody knows. Second, there's a separate program specifically for seniors called the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, which provides coupons for fresh produce at farmers markets and roadside stands for eligible low-income older adults. It's administered through states, and it is chronically underused. Third, there's the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which provides monthly food packages specifically to low-income people 60 and older. It's a separate thing from SNAP, and you may qualify for both. Fourth, if there's a food bank or pantry within reach, use it and understand that most do not verify income at the door. The number of working and retired people who won't walk through that door because they believe they aren't poor enough is enormous. And fifth, a practical one for the dollar store itself. Buy the largest size of anything you buy regularly, even when the sticker price is higher, because the per-ounce math almost always favors the bigger package. If cash flow makes that impossible in a given week, buy one large item per trip and rotate which one. That last technique is how people on tight budgets slowly climb out of the small package trap, and it works. I bring all of this up because there's a specific injustice in the arithmetic that I think deserves naming. The system provides a fixed benefit, and then places people in an environment where that benefit buys less than it would elsewhere, and then measures whether the program is working by whether people are food insecure. Nobody designed that. But it's the outcome, and the people it lands on are the ones with the fewest options. They picked your town on purpose, and there is a method to it. Let me tell you how these locations actually get chosen, because it's not random, and understanding it changes how you think about the whole thing. Kennedy Smith is a senior researcher at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, who has studied this extensively, and in an interview with the Daily Yonder, she described the strategy in terms that are worth quoting, the substance of. They're going after the low-hanging fruit when it comes to capturing consumer sales. These are communities that tend to be too small for a Walmart to have been there, but small enough that if there was a major grocery store chain there at some point, it's probably gone now. They see an opportunity. So the profile is specific. Not too big, because then Walmart is already there and the competition is real. Not too tiny, because there has to be enough spending. And ideally a place where the chain grocery already left, so the only competition is one family-owned store that has been struggling for a decade. And then Smith said something I found genuinely striking, and I want to give you her exact framing. She said she thinks they are a little predatory in choosing places where they think political resistance is going to be weak, and where it's easy for them to come in and request that a piece of land be rezoned for commercial purposes and not get a lot of blowback from the community. Where political resistance is going to be weak. Now I want to be careful here. That's a researcher's characterization, and companies would obviously dispute it. Site selection at any retailer involves demographics, traffic counts, land cost, and competitive analysis, and none of that is sinister. But look at what it means practically. Regardless of intent, a rezoning request comes before a planning commission or a town council. It's on the agenda, technically public. It's usually described in bureaucratic language about a parcel and a use classification. Almost nobody comes. Maybe 11 people, and they're there about something else. The rezoning passes frequently on a consent agenda without discussion because it looks like a routine land use matter and because a new store means a few jobs and some sales tax revenue, and those are genuinely real benefits that a small town badly needs. And 2 years later, the grocery store is gone, and everybody wonders how it happened. Nobody hid anything. It was all public. It just happened in a room with nobody in it, described in language nobody reads, and by the time the consequences arrived, the decision was 5 years old. The ILSR's 2023 report, called The Dollar Store Invasion, documented that dollar stores are disproportionately located in low-income and rural areas. And that's the pattern that ties all of this together. These stores go where people have the least money, the least political power, and the fewest alternatives, which is also, not coincidentally, where the most older people on fixed incomes live, because young people leave small towns and old people stay. So the demographic most harmed by losing a grocery store is the demographic most likely to be living in the towns targeted. That's not a conspiracy. It's a business model meeting a demographic reality, and the result is the same either way. 75 communities have already fought back, and some of them won. Now let me give you the genuinely hopeful part, because there is one, and I think it's the most useful thing in this entire video. Towns are pushing back, and it's working, and the mechanism is available to any community in America. In 2018, the Tulsa City Council passed an ordinance banning dollar stores from opening within a mile of an existing location. Think about how simple that is. Not a ban on dollar stores, a spacing requirement. You can have one, you just can't cluster 4 of them in a 2-mile stretch. And according to a 2023 report from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, at least 75 communities have followed suit with some form of restriction. 75 towns and cities. That's not a movement anybody's heard of, and it's real. The tools they've used vary, and they're all things any town council already has the authority to do. Some passed dispersal ordinances, which set minimum distances between similar stores. Some passed formula business restrictions, which apply to chain stores generally and require them to go through a special permit process rather than being approved automatically. Some set design and size standards that make a generic prefabricated building non-compliant. Some require a full review that includes an assessment of the impact on existing businesses, which forces the conversation to happen in public. And some have paired restrictions with active support for a local grocery, which brings me to the thing I'm most encouraged by. There are towns in this country that have built community-owned grocery stores, cooperatives where residents buy shares, municipally owned stores in a few cases, nonprofit models, school-based stores where a high school runs the grocery as part of a business program, which sounds unlikely and has actually worked in several places. Kansas State's Rural Grocery Initiative exists specifically to help communities do this, and there are similar programs at other land-grant universities. They have models, guidance, and case studies of towns that got a store back. Because here's the thing that makes this urgent. The Rural Grocery Initiative found that 1 in 5 rural grocery stores closed between 2008 and 2018. And in half of the 105 Kansas communities that lost a grocer, no new store had opened by 2023. Half of them still with nothing, years later, which tells you that once it's gone, it does not come back on its own. That's the whole reason the fight has to happen before rather than after. So here's what to actually do if this is happening in your town. And I'd say this is the highest leverage thing in this video. Watch your planning commission and town council agendas. Most publish them online now, and most will email them to you if you ask the clerk. That takes 1 email and about 90 seconds a week to scan. Look for rezoning requests, and look for anything on a consent agenda involving a commercial parcel. If a rezoning is requested by an LLC you've never heard of, that's worth asking about. Show up and ask 4 questions on the record. Who is the end user? Has an impact study been done on existing businesses? Does the town have any dispersal or formula business ordinance? And what happens to this building if the store closes in 8 years? That last one matters because dollar stores do close, and an empty steel building on a rezoned commercial parcel at the edge of town is a very hard thing to do anything with afterward. And here's the thing that makes this genuinely winnable. Those meetings have 11 people in them. If 15 residents show up who are clearly organized and clearly informed, that is an overwhelming show of force in a small town, and council members notice immediately. That's not a theory. That's how 75 communities did it. And I want to add the argument that actually persuades a town council, because outrage does not, and I've watched people try. Council members are not going to vote against a business that brings jobs and sales tax revenue, because residents dislike the chain. That's not a winning argument, and it shouldn't be. The argument that works is fiscal, and it goes like this. The town currently has a locally owned grocery store that employs a certain number of people at more than minimum wage, pays commercial property tax, banks locally, and whose owner lives in the district. That is existing tax base. The proposed store will employ fewer people, at lower wages, and its profits leave the community entirely. If the new store causes the existing one to close, the town does not gain a business. It trades one for a smaller one and loses the difference, permanently, because the USDA data shows rural grocers do not come back. Then you ask for an economic impact study before the vote. Not a ban. A study. That request is very hard for a council to refuse because refusing it means saying out loud that they'd rather not know. And the delay it creates is frequently enough for residents to organize. That's the play. Not anger. A reasonable procedural request that forces the arithmetic into public view before the decision rather than after. The drive to the next town costs more than people calculate. Let me talk about what actually happens after the grocery closes, because people say, well, they'll just drive to the next town, and I want to take that apart. Say the nearest real grocery store is now 22 miles away. That's a common figure once a small town loses its store. 22 miles each way is 44 miles round trip. At current gas prices, on a vehicle getting reasonable mileage, that's somewhere around $6 to $8 in fuel per trip. Call it 7. Now that alone would be manageable. But the fuel is the smallest part of it. There's the wear on the vehicle, which the IRS values at considerably more than fuel alone when they set the mileage rate, because tires and brakes and oil and depreciation are real. There's the time. 44 miles on rural roads is close to an hour of driving, plus the shopping. So a grocery run that used to be 20 minutes is now most of a morning. And here's the part nobody calculates. Because the trip is expensive, people go less often. Instead of twice a week, they go every 2 weeks, which changes what you can buy. You cannot buy much fresh food on a 2-week cycle. Lettuce doesn't last 2 weeks. Berries don't. Fresh fish doesn't. Milk barely does. So the shopping shifts toward things that keep, which is the same shelf-stable processed food you were trying to get away from. The person drove 44 miles and came home with a cart that isn't very different from what the dollar store sells, because that's what survives the interval. And then there's the group that can't make the drive at all. The person who no longer drives at night, and in winter it's dark at 4:30. The person who doesn't drive on the highway anymore, which a great many people quietly stopped doing in their late 70s. The person whose car needs a repair they can't afford. The person who never drove. For all of them, 22 miles is not a distance, it's a wall. And what they do is exactly what you'd expect. They shop at the dollar store because it's the store that's there. So the town doesn't split into people who drive and people who don't. It splits into people who can still eat a reasonable diet and people who can't. And the dividing line is whether you can operate a motor vehicle on a highway. That is a genuinely strange way to organize access to food, and it's how a large share of rural America works right now. There's one more piece to this, and it's the one that quietly compounds. When people drive 22 miles for groceries, they don't only buy groceries there, they fill the tank there, they stop at the pharmacy there, they get lunch there, they pick up the hardware item there. So the grocery store closing doesn't just cost the town a grocery store. It redirects an entire pattern of spending to a different town, and the hardware store and the diner and the pharmacy in your town lose customers they never knew were connected to the grocery at all. That's why losing the grocery is frequently the beginning of a town's decline rather than a symptom of it. It's the anchor, and everything else was quietly attached to it. Supporting the store you still have is the only thing that actually works. Let me get personal and practical now, because most of you are not going to lead a zoning fight, and there's something more direct that matters more anyway. If your town still has a grocery store, that store is more fragile than you think, and your shopping is genuinely a vote. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like a guilt trip about paying more, and I do not want to guilt anybody who's counting dollars. If money is tight, you buy what you can afford, and nobody should say a word to you about it. But here's the arithmetic that most people don't know, and it changes the picture. The grocery store makes almost nothing on the produce and the meat. It makes its money on the center aisles. Which means the way to help it survive is not to shop there entirely, it's to buy the profitable items there sometimes. If you buy your paper towels and your cereal and your canned goods at the grocery instead of the dollar store, even half the time, you're supporting the exact part of the business that keeps the produce section alive. And if everybody in a small town shifted even a quarter of their center aisle spending back, that would be the difference between a store closing and a store surviving. That's not sentiment, that's how thin those margins are. The second thing is to tell the owner, genuinely. Small-town grocers are frequently working 60 hours a week wondering whether it's worth it, and hearing from a customer that they matter is not nothing, and ask them what they need. Some of them would deliver if they knew there was demand. Some would carry a product if somebody asked. Some are looking at whether to invest in an upgrade and are trying to gauge whether the town would use it. Third, if you have a farmer's market, use it, and find out whether it accepts SNAP. A great many do now, and a lot of them run programs that double SNAP dollars spent on produce. That's a real and underused benefit. Fourth, look into whether your area agency on aging or your senior center has a food program. Home-delivered meals, congregate meal sites, commodity food boxes for seniors. These exist nearly everywhere and are chronically underused because people think they're for somebody worse off than they are. And fifth, if you can grow anything at all, even a container of tomatoes on a porch, do it. and give some away. The towns that hold together are the ones where people are giving each other zucchini in August. Now let me say the last thing, and I want to be balanced about it because I don't think anger at a company is going to accomplish very much. I am not telling you to boycott Dollar General. In a lot of towns, it's the only store there is, and telling somebody to drive 40 minutes on principle when they're on a fixed income is advice from a person who doesn't understand the situation. What I'm telling you is that the store is not a grocery store, whatever the map on your phone says. It's a general merchandise store that sells some food. Use it for what it's good for. Cleaning supplies, paper goods, greeting cards, seasonal items, and the things where the price genuinely is lower. And know the unit price, always. Because the entire pricing structure of that business rests on people not doing the arithmetic, and doing the arithmetic is free. Here's what I keep coming back to about all of this. Nobody voted to take the grocery store out of small-town America. There was no policy, no law. It happened through about 4,000 rezoning decisions, in rooms with 11 people in them, and about 100 million individual shopping trips where somebody grabbed the paper towels at the store on the way home because it was easier. Every one of those was reasonable, and together they produced something nobody would have chosen if you'd put it on a ballot. That's how most things happen in this country now, and I think the only real answer is that a few people in each town have to be the ones who pay attention. If that's you, go look at your planning commission agenda this week, and go buy your cereal at the grocery store. If any of this is happening where you live, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one, and I'd genuinely like to know which towns are fighting it and how it's going, because I think a lot of people watching feel like it's only happening to them. We keep it real here for all of us. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye for now.